Your pancreas is working overtime right now. Not because you're eating something at this exact moment, but because over the last few months or years, you've been asking it to do something it wasn't designed to do. Produce insulin constantly, all day long, just to keep your blood sugar from spiraling out of control. And here's what makes this dangerous. You don't feel it happening. There's no pain, no alarm bells, no warning light on your dashboard telling you that one of the most important hormone systems in your body is breaking down. Insulin resistance doesn't announce itself until it's already stolen years of your health, usually in the form of type 2 diabetes, but before that comes the silent decade where your cells stop listening to insulin signals, your pancreas exhausts itself trying to compensate, and your body slides into a metabolic state that damages nearly every organ system you have. The real problem is that most people don't even know what insulin resistance is, let alone how to prevent it. And the advice they do get focuses on what to avoid rather than what to actively do. Cut carbs, reduce sugar, lose weight, all true but incomplete. What we now understand is that insulin resistance is preventable through specific targeted actions that restore your body's ability to respond to insulin properly. And most of these actions have nothing to do with restrictive dieting or calorie counting. Hi, I'm Dr. Alex. I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years working in AAND, I've seen what happens when insulin resistance progresses into full-blown type 2 diabetes. I've treated the heart attacks that come 15 years earlier in diabetics. I've managed the kidney failure that develops when blood sugar damages the filtration system. I've witnessed the strokes, the amputations, the vision loss, and the infections that don't heal. And what strikes me every single time is that these outcomes were largely preventable. The tragedy isn't the disease itself, it's that the disease develops silently over years while people are living their normal lives, unaware that their metabolism is deteriorating. My goal now is to help people avoid these outcomes entirely by understanding what insulin resistance actually is and taking action before it's too late. Now, before we get into the 15 specific strategies, I want to ask you for something. I'm going to make you a promise right now. I promise to give you the most thorough, scientifically grounded explanation of insulin resistance prevention that I possibly can. Everything I share is based on current research and clinical experience, not trends or clickbait. What I ask in return is simple. Give this channel a chance. Hit the subscribe button. If you watched this entire video and you don't think it was worth your time, if you haven't learned something genuinely useful, then feel free to unsubscribe. No hard feelings whatsoever. But if you give me your attention, I'll give you everything I've learned from over a decade in medicine about how to protect your metabolic health and live longer. So please help me reach more people like you by hitting that subscribe button. Now let's talk about what insulin resistance actually is. To understand how to prevent insulin resistance, you first need to understand what it is and why it develops. Insulin is a hormone produced by your pancreas, and its primary job is to move glucose from your bloodstream into your cells where it can be used for energy. Every time you eat, your blood sugar rises, and your pancreas releases insulin to deal with that rise. Insulin binds to receptors on your cells and signals them to open up and let the glucose in. It's a beautifully simple system, and in a healthy metabolic state, it works flawlessly. Your blood sugar rises after a meal, insulin gets released, glucose gets cleared from the bloodstream and stored or used for energy, insulin levels drop back down, and the system resets. That cycle should happen cleanly, 2 or 3 times a day, with long periods of low insulin in between. The problem starts when that cycle gets disrupted. Insulin resistance occurs when your cells stop responding properly to insulin's signal. It's not that insulin isn't being produced, it's that the cells have become resistant to it. They're ignoring the signal, so your pancreas responds by producing more insulin to force the message through. And for a while this works. Your blood sugar stays normal because your pancreas is compensating by flooding your system with extra insulin. But here's the trap. The more insulin you produce, the more resistant your cells become. It's a vicious cycle. High insulin causes more resistance, which requires even higher insulin, which causes more resistance. Eventually, your pancreas can't keep up, it starts to fail. And that's when your blood sugar begins to rise. That's when you get diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. But by that point, you've already been insulin resistant for years, possibly a decade or more. Now, what causes cells to become resistant in the first place? There are three primary mechanisms. The first is chronic inflammation. When your body is in a state of low-grade systemic inflammation, it alters how insulin receptors function. Inflammatory molecules, called cytokines, interfere with the insulin signaling pathway inside cells. This is why obesity, particularly visceral fat around the organs, is such a strong driver of insulin resistance. Fat tissue, especially deep abdominal fat, is metabolically active and produces inflammatory signals constantly. The second mechanism involves something called lipid accumulation in muscle and liver cells. When you consume more energy than your body can immediately use or store as glycogen, the excess gets converted to fat. Some of that fat ends up being stored inside muscle cells and liver cells, where it doesn't belong. This is called ectopic fat deposition. And when fat accumulates in these cells, it physically interferes with insulin signaling. The cell becomes less able to respond to insulin because the machinery is clogged up with fat. The third mechanism is mitochondrial dysfunction. Your mitochondria are the energy-producing factories inside your cells. When they're working efficiently, they burn glucose and fat for energy cleanly. But when they become dysfunctional, often due to oxidative stress or nutrient overload, they produce less energy and more waste products. This creates a metabolic backlog. The cell can't process incoming glucose efficiently, so it becomes resistant to taking in more. It's like a factory that's already overflowing with half-finished products. It doesn't want more raw materials coming in. Now here's what makes insulin resistance so insidious. It doesn't just affect glucose metabolism. High insulin levels have downstream effects throughout your entire body. Insulin is a growth hormone. When it's chronically elevated, it promotes fat storage, particularly around the abdomen. It increases hunger and cravings, especially for refined carbohydrates. It raises blood pressure by causing your kidneys to retain sodium. It increases triglyceride production in the liver, which raises your risk of cardiovascular disease. It promotes inflammation, which worsens the resistance. And it interferes with other hormones, including sex hormones and thyroid hormones. So insulin resistance isn't just about blood sugar. It's a whole body metabolic disorder that accelerates aging, increases disease risk, and makes it nearly impossible to lose weight even when you're eating less. What becomes clear when you understand the biology is that insulin resistance develops when three conditions are met simultaneously. First, you're consuming more energy than your body can efficiently process. Second, you're not giving your body periods of low insulin to recover and restore sensitivity. Third, you're not engaging the mechanisms that actively improve insulin sensitivity, like exercise and muscle contraction. That's the foundation. Now let's talk about what went wrong and why so many people develop insulin resistance without realizing it. The mistake that's driving the insulin resistance epidemic isn't a single dietary villain or one bad habit. It's the combination of how modern life is structured and the advice we've been given for the last 50 years. We've been told to eat small, frequent meals to keep our metabolism up and our blood sugar stable. We've been told that fat makes you fat, so we replaced fat with carbohydrates, often refined ones. We've been told that exercise is primarily about burning calories, not about metabolic signaling. And we've been living in an environment where physical activity has been engineered out of daily life, while hyper-palatable, energy-dense foods are available every few hundred meters. The result is that most people are eating in a way that keeps insulin elevated for 12, 14, 16 hours a day. They eat breakfast, then a mid-morning snack, then lunch, then an afternoon snack, then dinner, then an evening snack. Every one of those eating events triggers an insulin release, and between those events, insulin never gets a chance to fall back to baseline. Their cells are constantly being told to take in glucose, constantly being stimulated by insulin, and over time, they stop responding as effectively. It's metabolic exhaustion. The system was never designed to operate that way. Add to that the fact that most of those meals and snacks are rich in refined carbohydrates. Breakfast is cereal or toast. The snack is a granola bar or a muffin. Lunch includes bread, chips, or pasta. Dinner has rice or potatoes. Dessert is ice cream or cookies. Each of these foods causes a rapid blood sugar spike, which requires a large insulin response. And that pattern repeats day after day, year after year. The pancreas is working constantly, insulin is elevated constantly, and the cells are being bombarded constantly. Then there's the sedentary trap. Most people sit for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. Sitting in the car, sitting at the desk, sitting at meals, sitting in front of the TV. And here's what happens metabolically when you sit. Your muscles aren't contracting. When muscles contract, they pull glucose out of the bloodstream independent of insulin. It's called non-insulin mediated glucose uptake, and it's one of the most powerful mechanisms for maintaining insulin sensitivity. But when you're sedentary, that mechanism isn't active. Your muscles aren't helping clear glucose, so your pancreas has to produce even more insulin to compensate. Over time, muscle cells that aren't being used regularly become less metabolically active and more insulin resistant. The third part of the mistake is chronic stress and poor sleep. When you're stressed, your body releases cortisol, which raises blood sugar to provide energy for the perceived threat. If that stress is constant, cortisol is constantly elevated, blood sugar is constantly elevated, and insulin is constantly being released to try to bring it down. It's the same cycle, just driven by stress instead of food. Poor sleep has a similar effect. Studies show that even a single night of poor sleep reduces insulin sensitivity by up to 30%. Your cells become less responsive to insulin, so your pancreas has to work harder. When poor sleep becomes chronic, so does the insulin resistance. So the modern lifestyle creates a perfect storm. Frequent eating keeps insulin high, refined carbohydrates spike it even higher. Sedentary behavior removes the one mechanism that doesn't require insulin to clear glucose. Chronic stress and sleep deprivation make cells less sensitive, and inflammation from excess body fat amplifies the whole problem. This is why insulin resistance has become an epidemic. It's not because people lack willpower. It's because the environment and the advice have been working against their biology. The good news is that every one of these mechanisms is reversible. Insulin resistance can be prevented and even reversed by taking specific actions that restore your body's ability to respond to insulin. And that's what we're about to cover. Now let's talk about the 15 specific strategies to prevent insulin resistance before it's too late. These aren't random tips, each one targets a specific mechanism we've discussed. Some address the frequency and composition of meals. Others activate the pathways that improve insulin sensitivity. Some reduce inflammation or restore mitochondrial function. And several address the hormonal and lifestyle factors that drive resistance. The goal isn't to do all 15 perfectly, starting tomorrow. The goal is to understand which mechanisms are most broken in your own life, and start addressing those first. The first strategy is to implement time-restricted eating. This means confining all your eating to a specific window each day, typically 8 to 10 hours, and fasting for the remaining 14 to 16 hours. The mechanism here is simple. When you're not eating, insulin levels fall. During that fasted period, your cells get a break from constant insulin stimulation, and sensitivity begins to restore. Studies published in Cell Metabolism show that even without changing what people eat, simply shortening the eating window improves insulin sensitivity, reduces fasting insulin levels, and lowers blood sugar. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require calorie counting or food restriction. You're eating the same foods, just within a tighter time frame. For most people, this means eating between noon and 8 p.m. or between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. The longer overnight fast is where the magic happens. The second strategy is to prioritize protein at every meal. Protein has the lowest insulin response of any macronutrient, and it increases satiety, which means you naturally eat less throughout the day. But more importantly, protein preserves muscle mass, and muscle is your largest glucose disposal site. The more muscle you have, the more capacity you have to store and use glucose without spiking insulin. Research in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition demonstrates that meals with 30 grams or more of protein result in significantly lower insulin spikes compared to carbohydrate-heavy meals. With the same calorie count, aim for at least 30 grams of protein at each main meal. This could be 4 eggs, a palm-sized piece of meat, a cup of Greek yogurt, or a protein shake. The third strategy is to add fiber to every carbohydrate-containing meal. Fiber slows the absorption of glucose, which flattens the blood sugar spike and reduces the insulin response. It also feeds beneficial gut bacteria, which produce short-chain fatty acids that improve insulin sensitivity. A study in the Journal of Nutrition found that people who consumed 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day had significantly better insulin sensitivity than those consuming less than 15 grams, even when total carbohydrate intake was the same. Practical sources include vegetables, legumes, berries, and whole intact grains, not processed whole grain products. If you're eating rice, add a large serving of vegetables. If you're having bread, pair it with avocado or a salad. Never eat refined carbs in isolation. The fourth strategy is to walk after meals, particularly after dinner. Walking activates your muscles, which pull glucose out of your bloodstream without needing insulin. A 15 to 30-minute walk after eating can reduce the post-meal blood sugar spike by up to 30%. This has been shown repeatedly in studies published in Diabetologia. The walk doesn't need to be intense, a moderate pace is sufficient. The key is timing. Walking within 30 to 60 minutes after finishing your meal is when you'll see the greatest benefit, because that's when blood sugar is rising. This single habit done consistently can dramatically reduce your daily insulin load. The fifth strategy is to lift weights or do resistance training at least twice per week. Resistance training increases muscle mass, and muscle is metabolically active tissue that absorbs glucose. But the benefit goes beyond just having more muscle. Resistance training also improves the insulin sensitivity of the muscle you already have. When you contract a muscle under load, it activates glucose transporters that pull glucose into the cell independent of insulin. This effect lasts for 24 to 48 hours after the workout. Studies in the Journal of Applied Physiology show that people who do resistance training twice per week have significantly better insulin sensitivity than those who only do cardio or who are sedentary, even when body weight doesn't change. You don't need to become a bodybuilder. 2 or 3 full body sessions per week, each lasting 30 to 40 minutes, is sufficient to see metabolic benefits. The sixth strategy is to get 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep every night. Sleep deprivation is one of the fastest ways to induce insulin resistance. Research from Annals of Internal Medicine shows that restricting sleep to 4 to 5 hours per night for just 1 week reduces insulin sensitivity by up to 40%. The mechanism involves cortisol, inflammatory cytokines, and disrupted circadian rhythms, all of which interfere with insulin signaling. If you're not sleeping well, nothing else you do will be as effective. Prioritize a consistent sleep schedule, a dark and cool bedroom, and eliminating screens for at least an hour before bed. The seventh strategy is to manage chronic stress through daily practice. Chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated, which raises blood sugar and forces your pancreas to produce more insulin. Over time, this leads to resistance. Effective stress management doesn't mean eliminating all stress from your life. It means giving your body regular opportunities to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and bring cortisol down. This can be deep breathing, meditation, yoga, or even just 20 minutes of quiet time without screens. Studies in psychosomatic medicine show that people who practice daily stress reduction techniques have lower fasting insulin and better insulin sensitivity than those who don't, independent of diet or exercise. The eighth strategy is to eliminate liquid calories, particularly sugary drinks and fruit juices. Liquid sugar bypasses normal satiety signals and spikes blood sugar faster than solid food because it's absorbed almost immediately. A single can of soda or glass of juice can cause an insulin surge that takes hours to resolve. Studies in circulation show that people who consume 1 or more sugary drinks per day have a significantly higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to those who consume less than 1 per month. Replace sugary drinks with water, black coffee, or tea. If you need flavor, add lemon or a splash of unsweetened almond milk. This one change alone can dramatically reduce your daily insulin load. The ninth strategy is to reduce or eliminate ultra-processed foods. These foods are engineered to be hyperpalatable, meaning they're designed to override your natural satiety signals and make you eat more. They also tend to be low in fiber, low in protein, and high in refined carbs and industrial seed oils, all of which promote insulin resistance. Research published in Cell Metabolism shows that people who eat ultra-processed foods consume 500 more calories per day compared to when they eat whole foods, even when the meals are matched for calories, sugar, fat, and fiber. The processing itself seems to alter how the food is metabolized. Focus on whole, minimally processed foods: meat, fish, eggs, vegetables, fruit, legumes, nuts, and whole intact grains. If it comes in a box with more than 5 ingredients, it's probably ultra-processed. The 10th strategy is to increase your intake of omega-3 fatty acids from fish or supplements. Omega-3 hydration reduce inflammation, which is one of the primary drivers of insulin resistance. They also improve mitochondrial function and enhance insulin signaling. Studies in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition show that people with higher blood levels of omega-3s have better insulin sensitivity and lower fasting insulin compared to those with low levels. Aim for 2 to 3 servings of fatty fish per week, such as salmon, mackerel, or sardines. If you don't eat fish, consider a high-quality fish oil supplement, providing at least 1 to 2 grams of combined EPA and DHA daily. The 11th strategy is to incorporate vinegar into meals that contain carbohydrates. Acetic acid, the active compound in vinegar, has been shown to reduce the blood sugar spike after carbohydrate-containing meals by 20 to 30%. It works by slowing gastric emptying and improving insulin sensitivity in muscle tissue. A study in diabetes care found that consuming 1 to 2 tablespoons of vinegar before or with a meal significantly reduced post-meal blood sugar and insulin levels. You can add it to salads, mix it into water, and drink it before eating, or use it in cooking. Apple cider vinegar is popular, but any vinegar containing acetic acid will work. The 12th strategy is to avoid snacking between meals. Every time you eat, even a small snack, you trigger an insulin release. If you're eating every 2 to 3 hours, insulin never drops to baseline. Your cells are constantly being stimulated, and over time, they become less responsive. Research in the International Journal of Obesity shows that people who eat 3 meals per day without snacking have better insulin sensitivity and lower fasting insulin compared to those who eat the bout. Same total calories spread across 6 smaller meals. If you're eating balanced meals with adequate protein and fiber, you shouldn't need to snack. If you are hungry between meals, it's a sign that your previous meal wasn't balanced or that your insulin signaling is already disrupted. The 13th strategy is to stay hydrated throughout the day. Dehydration concentrates blood sugar, which means your pancreas has to produce more insulin to clear it. Chronic mild dehydration has been linked to higher fasting blood sugar and increased insulin resistance in multiple studies. Aim for at least 2 liters of water per day, more if you're active or in a hot climate. A simple rule is that your urine should be pale yellow. If it's dark, you're not drinking enough. The 14th strategy is to get morning sunlight exposure within an hour of waking. Light exposure regulates your circadian rhythm, which in turn regulates cortisol, insulin, and glucose metabolism. Disrupted circadian rhythms are strongly associated with insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. Studies show that people who get regular morning light exposure have better insulin sensitivity and lower fasting glucose compared to those who don't, independent of sleep duration. Spend 10 to 15 minutes outside within an hour of waking, ideally without sunglasses so the light reaches your eyes. This resets your internal clock and improves metabolic function throughout the day. The 15th and final strategy is to consider intermittent fasting or periodic extended fasts under medical supervision. Fasting for 24 hours or longer triggers autophagy, which is the process by which your cells clean out damaged components, including dysfunctional mitochondria and insulin receptors. It also drastically lowers insulin levels, which gives your entire system a reset. Research in aging shows that people who do periodic fasts of 24 to 72 hours see significant improvements in insulin sensitivity, reductions in visceral fat, and improvements in inflammatory markers. This isn't for everyone, and it should be done carefully, especially if you have any underlying health conditions or are on medication. But for metabolically healthy individuals looking to prevent insulin resistance or reverse early stages of it, periodic fasting can be a powerful tool. Always consult with a doctor before attempting extended fasts. Now let's bring this back to the clinical reality. In the emergency department, I don't see people with insulin resistance. I see the outcomes of insulin resistance after it's progressed for years or decades. I see the 55-year-old man with his first heart attack who's been pre-diabetic for 10 years but didn't take it seriously because he felt fine. I see the 68-year-old woman with kidney failure who's been on diabetes medication for 15 years but never changed her diet because the medication kept her blood sugar just barely controlled. I see the 72-year-old man who's lost sensation in his feet due to diabetic neuropathy and now he's falling, fracturing bones, losing independence. These aren't uncommon cases, they're the norm. And what's heartbreaking is that every one of these outcomes was preventable. The damage didn't happen overnight. It accumulated slowly, silently, over years of elevated insulin, elevated blood sugar, chronic inflammation, and metabolic dysfunction. What I've seen repeatedly is that the patients who avoid these outcomes are the ones who took action early. They didn't wait until they were diagnosed with diabetes. They didn't wait until they had symptoms. They saw the early warning signs: a fasting glucose of 100 to 110, a hemoglobin A1C of 5.7 to 6.4, to waist circumference that was creeping up, and they made changes. They implemented time-restricted eating. They started walking after meals. They prioritized protein and fiber. They lifted weights twice a week. They fixed their sleep. And within months, their metabolic markers improved. Their fasting insulin dropped. Their glucose tolerance improved. Their waist circumference decreased. And most importantly, they stopped the progression toward diabetes. Medication has its place, and for people with established diabetes, it's often necessary. But medication doesn't reverse the underlying metabolic dysfunction. It manages blood sugar while the disease continues to progress. What reverses insulin resistance is addressing the root causes, restoring insulin sensitivity at the cellular level, reducing inflammation, improving mitochondrial function, giving your pancreas regular periods of rest. These are things that medication cannot do. Only lifestyle changes can do them.